everyone. As Sarah said, I am Rosie Cockgreave and I am the project manager of the Saving Devon's Treescape project. I'll just give you a brief overview of the project, why we exist, and then I'll pass over to Danni and she'll talk about how the urban trees are a major part of our project as well and why they're so vital to our landscapes. So the Saving Devon's Treescape project started in March 2020, which feels like a long time ago now, and it was a terrible time to start a new project, as you can imagine, if you think that far back. But it's a fantastic project and it's been thriving ever since. So we are National Lottery Heritage funded, and we have about 17 or so partners, including everyone from like the Woodland Trust and the Forestry Commission to local Devon partners like the Devon County Council, the National Landscapes, and Clinton Devon Estate, a local landowner as well. So the project came about due to the decline in Devon's treescapes and the impact that's having, but with a particular focus on ash dieback. So ash dieback is estimated to kill around 90% of our ash trees in the coming years. There's still lots of research being done into that at the moment, but ash trees are the second most common tree outside of woodlands in Devon, so it's going to have a really huge impact on our landscape. There's an estimated 1.9 million mature ash trees outside of woodlands in Devon alone. So as you can imagine, with 90% of them due to die, we're going to start seeing a lot of gaps popping up around our landscape, and you've probably noticed it already. A lot of our ash trees are outside of woodlands, so that's why this project is focusing on that in particular, which is, again, a lot of those trees are in urban areas, which is why we've got Danni speaking with us today. So the project is aiming to not only get new trees in the ground, so we're aiming to plant and nurture around 250,000 trees over the course of the project, not ash trees, other UK native species instead. But we're also just looking to raise awareness of the importance of treescapes, the emotional benefit, the agricultural benefit, the economic benefit. They're just wonderful things. If you were to walk to your local shop or to your local school and imagine there wasn't a single tree there, it'd be a really sad sight, and I'm sure our mental health would suffer from that as well. So they're really vital to us. So yeah, we're looking at everything from planting the trees to growing the trees, to looking at the species in the trees and everything in between. Because they're just vital to us and to our landscape. So I won't go into too much detail, but we'll send you some links afterwards if you'd like to find out more about the project and other ways that you can get involved. But for now, I'll pass you over to Danni, who will take you through the wonderful world of urban trees.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was really lovely. I enjoyed hearing the introduction too. I'm just going to get my screen share up. So in a second, if you could just let me know, is that coming up okay on the screen?
Yeah, that's all good.
Lovely. Okay. So hi, thank you so much everyone for joining. It's really, really lovely to have you all here today on what I thought it was going to be quite a sunny day, but it's quite a cloudy day here. So although you might have better weather where you are, but thank you so much for joining. As I say, my name is Danni, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about the benefits of trees in urban areas, not just for people, but also for wildlife. And I'm going to cover some of the challenges that they face as well towards the end. So I have been working at Treeconomics for about 5 years. I'm one of the senior urban forest consultants, and I work a lot on our projects that have either a community focus or perhaps have a training sort of element. So a lot of the projects that I work on involve training volunteers to collect field data, which we can then process and hopefully provide some really useful data and information for our clients. We are a local based organisation. For those of you who are in Devon, obviously this is part of the Devon Wildlife Trust webinar, but I appreciate people might be from other places in the country. But for those of you that are in Devon, we're located in Exeter, so we're all very nearby, and most of the team live or work very close to within the southwest. So it's really lovely to be here with you today. We work with lots of different types of people. So we work with organisations like sort of the Wildlife Trust, the Woodland Trust, National Trust, but also with councils and local authorities from sort of town size right up to county and district size. And our mission is sustainable treescapes for everyone. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, one of the topics that we talk about all the time are the benefits of trees, because as Rosie's just sort of really highlighted, they are absolutely wonderful things, and they're there are lots of benefits that are really well known, which you might well have come across before, such as their ability to capture carbon, their ability to improve air quality, sort of through removing and filtering pollutants. There are lots of sort of less well-known ones, and I thought it'd be really nice to talk about some of those this morning and maybe explore some of the benefits that that might not be quite so well known. So a couple of examples are sort of their ability to increase property value. So where you've got a tree located within a sort of close proximity to a property, studies have shown that that will increase the value of the property. They create attractive high streets, which have increased footfall and increases in consumer spending, but they just create that wonderful sense of place, and a place that people want to spend time, a place people want to walk. They provide cultural links to the past, and I personally, I know, when I'm out sort of wandering around maybe a new town or new city, or somewhere that I've not been before, I think instinctively you would choose a road that's tree lined versus one that's not. And I think before I worked in this role, I hadn't really realised that I was doing it, but actually now I'm quite aware of it. And before you know it, you sort of follow the trees and definitely tend to sort of gravitate towards those spaces that have got lots of tree coverage. And there's probably, many benefits that we're sort of enjoying without even realising it. One of the sort of key areas that I thought would be nice to focus on first would be kind of the environmental benefits. So as we're all aware, our climate is changing, it's becoming warmer, wetter. We're going to have sort of increased numbers of storms that are sort of more severe, and sort of the need for trees and the sort of services they provide will grow as those things increase. So one of those is their ability to reduce surface water flooding or runoff, and it's just by that sort of their physical presence. So if you can imagine, as rain falls onto a tree, the foliage within the canopy is able to intercept some of that water and hold it on the leaves. That water is then re-evaporated when the sun sort of reappears. And that process of capturing the water from rainfall and then re-evaporating has a real cost saving. If you can imagine, if you didn't have that tree and the rainfall fell directly onto the pavements and the roads, it would eventually be directed down into the drains and through our combined sewage system, and all the water that goes through that process has to be treated by water companies such as South West Water, which has a very real cost attached to it. For Plymouth, we did a study with Plymouth a few years back, and we determined that the sort of cost saving of avoided runoff stands at around £600,000 per year. So that's a service those trees provide every single year, just by being where they are and sort of the process that they go through. But it's not just about their ability to sort of reduce or infiltrate surface water. It's also about their provision of shade and UV protection and sort of regulating of temperatures, which is particularly important in urban areas where we've got lots of, buildings and hard surfaces, which creates something called the urban heat island effect. Typically in sort of urban areas, temperatures can be about 7 to 10 degrees warmer than sort of the adjacent rural areas. So when you've got those, real concentrations of heat and increased temperature, the need for shade and sort of regulating of temperatures is really important. They're also a fantastic resource in terms of their ability to remove pollution. So a study by Green Blue Urban showed that there's around 24% reduction in particulate matter near a mature tree. It's obviously a very generalised statement, and it will vary between species and sort of size of the tree and all that kind of thing. But I thought that was a really interesting piece of data just to sort of illustrate actually how much they're able to sort of capture and what the reduction capacity is. Now, this photo is from the Bristol Heart Institute, which is one of the departments within the BRI hospital within Bristol. And through the main department, they've got an atrium with trees. And I thought this was a really nice image to kind of capture the health and well-being benefits of trees. So there have been many studies dating back sort of as early as the 80s, which have cited the sort of importance of patients being able to see trees from their windows. It's shown that where patients have got a view of trees from their hospital bed, that their recovery from surgery is enhanced, they've got reduced pain and complications, and it generally sees the patient getting home quicker, which is unbelievable. I think when I heard that statistic the first time, I was just a bit mind blown that just by having that visual sight of a tree, it can have a real massive impact. They also encourage people, as I said earlier, to spend time outdoors. So taking perhaps more sustainable transport options, enjoying walking, cycling, just spending time outside with family and friends. And I think the NHS Forests project identified that the NHS could actually save an estimated £2.1 billion every year in treatment costs if everyone had access to good quality green space. So it's really important for our health and wellbeing benefits, and lots of studies have looked into the impact of that. They also interact with buildings. So this is very much due to, or sort of in relation to their situation, so where they're located in regards to the building, but they can actually provide a cooling effect on buildings that can reduce the need for air conditioning in summer. And in winter, in certain positions, they can also act in a sort of insulation capacity to reduce the heating needs. Also, interestingly, when located near workplaces, they've also been shown to improve concentration and productivity. Now, the last one is a really important one, but I'm not going to talk about it a lot because I imagine a lot of you here today, given that we're at a Devon Wildlife Trust webinar, are really very, very familiar with the need for habitats and spaces for wildlife. Trees provide a whole wealth of those, and particularly in urban areas where, there is lots of grey infrastructure, there's lots of buildings and roads and pavements. The spaces that trees provide are so vital for birds and small mammals and insects that need places to live. Some of them live within the canopy, some of them live right below the soil within the root space, and they are such a fantastic resource at providing those habitats, but also creating sort of connecting up the pockets of green space throughout urban areas through those wildlife corridors that they so naturally sort of create. So what I do a lot with my role is not just promote those benefits of trees, but also help people to understand how much benefit their trees provide. And there's quite a few different ways that we can do that. So there are a couple of tools available which can quantify those benefits. So I mentioned earlier about Plymouth and the value of their avoided runoff provision that those trees provide, and that was calculated using a tool called iTreeco, which is part of the iTree suite of tools. There are lots of tools within the suite, and a couple of them are usable within the UK, and that's iTreeco and iTree Canopy. I'm going to talk in a moment about iTree Canopy because I think it's a really helpful tool for anyone from practitioners to sort of volunteers. But what those tools do is they take information about trees and they're able to process the data and actually tell us how much in terms of, kilograms of carbon or cubic meters of water trees are able to sort of store or remove or, process in a way that is beneficial to urban areas. And they're also able to then assign a value to that, a pound sign. Now, not all of the benefits I've talked about already are able to be calculated in that way just because the methodology simply doesn't exist yet. But the ones that we are able to calculate using iTree are carbon storage and sequestration, pollution removal, and avoided runoff, so that stormwater capture. We also sometimes use mapping software such as GIS or satellite and LiDAR data to look at tree cover across large areas. So we might look at areas where you have concentrations of dense canopies, you've got lots and lots of tree cover, and areas where you've perhaps not got quite enough. And it's a really helpful way of prioritising where you need to plant trees in terms of where they can deliver the most benefit. And there's another really helpful tool which I'm going to talk about quickly, which is called the Tree Equity Score, which was recently published by the Woodland Trust. So iTree Canopy is a a really fantastic tool. It's freely available, and the nice thing about it is that you can measure canopy cover and benefits over any size area. So you can look at a park, you can look at the street that you live on, you can look at the town that you live within, and you can essentially undertake a quite straightforward survey. I will warn you, it's quite addictive once you get started, and you can then find out what the canopy cover is and an estimate of the benefits it provides. I've got one small caveat, which is that every year the government updates the value of some of those benefits, that they might not be up to date. So I'd focus, if you do use it, focus on the amounts rather than on the monetary values. And if you are interested in having a go at using iTrueCanopy, there's I've done a tutorial which is available on our website and it was done for the Woodland Trust. So if you'd like to have a little go or watch the tutorial, I can send the link through to that after the webinar. And the other tool which I thought would be really useful to highlight, both of these would be sort of usable by practitioners or volunteers, as I say, or community groups, is the tree equity score. So this focuses very much on equitable access to trees and looking at and comparing where you've got canopy cover and where the need for people exists. So looking at things like deprivation or heat and looking at where you've got enough canopy cover and where areas are really of high priority for expansion of canopy cover. Again, very similar to iTrueCanopy, it's a really nice tool to use. It's quite straightforward, and there is a tutorial if you would like to access that. So I didn't feel that I could talk about all the benefits of trees without talking about some of the challenges they face. And there are two really key, I suppose, groups of challenges that I thought I would focus on today, and those are climate change and pests and diseases. So as I said earlier, and I'm sure lots of people are aware, the climate here in the UK is becoming warmer and wetter, with sort of more chance of extreme weather storms, so causing sort of more wind, which can lead to sort of branch failure and damage structurally within the tree. But with the kind of changes in temperature and precipitation, it means that sort of water availability is going to become more variable. So trees are going to experience more drought, more periods of drought within the summer, and potentially more sort of waterlogging of soils in winter, and certainly more rain. So, and some trees, I think, I think it's fair to say that the sensitivity to that will vary a lot. Some species will adapt quite quickly and will do it with relatively low levels of stress, and other species of trees will really struggle and will find it a lot harder to adapt and sort of get used to those new kind of environments. And that will be, very different depending on the species and their sort of environmental tolerance. In terms of pests and diseases, the number of pests and diseases are growing, and in the year of 2021 to 2022, which is in the sort of recent accounts published by the Forestry Commission, they found a significant increase in the number of outbreaks that sort of required treatment. And the reason why they're increasing can be caused by a number of different factors. Two of the key ones that are of focus within the sort of plant biosecurity strategy for Great Britain at the moment are climate change and the global trade of plants, and also sort of travel of people around the country and other countries. So when we're importing trees from other countries, there's obviously the possibility of pests and diseases being introduced, and there's lots of protocols in place to try and minimise that risk and try and make sure that when trees are moved around, they're moved around carefully to kind of mitigate any opportunity for spread or introduction. But it is still an issue, and it is one of the reasons why pests and diseases are still increasing. Now, pests and diseases are not independent of each other. So although I've grouped them into two separate groups, they are kind of an interacting system. So it's very likely that as our climate changes, the way that pests and diseases interact with the host trees that they are found upon is likely to change. As I said earlier, sort of change in our climate is going to increase the stress that trees are experiencing, and stress trees are much less resilient to pests and diseases. So very similar to us as people, you know, if you're well rested, you're feeling, you know, great, you've had good food, you're well hydrated, and catch a cold, you're probably likely to feel a bit grotty for a few days, but will hopefully bounce back quite quickly and continue on. However, if you've, I don't know, perhaps had a previous virus and you're already feeling a little bit under the weather, or maybe not sleeping so well, or, you know, not quite your full self, and you catch the same cold, it might well affect you more severely. You might feel more poorly, and it might take longer for you to adapt and bounce back. And trees are very much the same. So when they're stressed, they're less resilient and less sort of able to withstand those attacks and to adapt and bounce back. So the better that we can get the health and condition of our trees, the better their resilience will be to pests and diseases. And one of the ones that I know was really important to talk about today was ash dieback. And Rosie talked a little bit about that at the start. So a couple of the things might actually be quite similar. I'm trying to remember which points Rosie talked about. But as you can see by the map on the screen, it's you know, throughout the UK, there are some pockets which don't have ash dieback currently. This is an up-to-date map of, I think it was 2023 by the Forestry Commission. So that is the current spread within the UK. It was first confirmed here in 2012, so it's been here for a good long time. It's caused by a fungus, and it's estimated to lose such a massive proportion of the trees. I think Rosie said 90% earlier, and I've seen lots of, you know, reports of between 80 and 90%, which is an absolutely enormous proportion of a species that represents such a large amount of our tree stock. And they're such an important species. They're found in woodland settings, but they're also found within urban settings. And the cost that's kind of attached to that loss is about £15 billion, which is kind of eye-watering, really, isn't it? It's an absolutely massive amount of funds, if you know, as a result of losing those trees. When we talked about the benefits that trees provide earlier, a really key thing to note is that typically the larger and more mature trees, those real large stature trees like ash and oak and lime, those trees with those really large full canopies, they're going to provide the greatest benefit sort of per tree. So they provide the greatest amount of benefit. So to lose a large tree of that size in itself is a big loss, but to lose such a massive proportion is really quite, you know, quite dramatic. So and the benefits that they provide and the loss of that, so their, you know, shade provision, their carbon sequestration, their ability to reduce stormwater within our sort of treescape and within urban areas is really devastating. However, I'm pleased to say there is some good news. So there are lots of projects going on, such as the Saving Devon's Treescapes project, which is looking at, you know, how do we recover from this? How do we repopulate the landscape? You know, what species are we going to be replacing ash with? And all those kind of things. But there are also researchers looking for variations within the species, which might be more tolerant to the disease. They're also looking at sort of I suppose the environments that trees are within and how that affects their sort of reaction to the disease. So there's some really good evidence to suggest from the Forestry Commission that a small proportion of trees will be tolerant to the disease, which is really fantastic news. It was really interesting that fewer symptoms were seen on ash trees growing in open spaces such as parklands. So I think the study that I looked at said that at these sites trees can survive for many years without displaying the symptoms that other trees in perhaps urban environments where they've perhaps got much more compacted soils or much less space for root growth might be much higher. And the plan is that eventually those trees or those species that are tolerant will hopefully be available for repopulating the landscape. And I think the optimistically, people are hoping that that will still be with ash trees, but it might just be a different variety or different type. At the moment, it's not possible, but there is lots of research going on to look into options of how we might be able to do that. So I thought it'd be really nice to perhaps finish on some things that we can do to help urban trees, and I tried to think of 5. So there are lots of different things that we can do, you know, I just thought I would try and think of 5 things that I thought might be really helpful for protecting them and hopefully enhancing urban landscapes and the trees within them. So the first thing is understanding the challenges. So as you can see from the map, obviously ash dieback as an example is actually really very well spread throughout the UK, but there are pockets which currently aren't experiencing it. It's not to say it's not there, but it's just to highlight that the challenges faced by trees will be different in different areas. So it's really important to understand which challenges the trees in your local area that you're helping to look after or that you manage, what challenges do they face, and thinking about a long-term plan for how to overcome that. So what things can you put in place to perhaps reduce the likelihood of a pest and disease establishing, or you know, what ground conditions can you do to help regulate water availability so that as our climate changes, the trees are in a better environment to be able to adapt. Perhaps looking at what species you might want to establish if you are planting new trees, and thinking about how to do that really, really well so that the ones you do plant reach maturity really healthily. So I think understanding the challenges and planning ways to overcome these is a really important one. The second one I thought of was following biosecurity practices. So trying to make sure that you, and also making sure that others are following them too. Making sure that you are following biosecurity practices. So trying to limit the possibility of spreading pests and diseases like ash dieback to other areas that don't currently have it. And making sure that when people are sort of buying trees for planting, that kind of thing, that the people you're buying from also have those protocols in place, so that that process is happening right throughout the process. Improving the health and condition of existing trees. So we've talked a lot about you know, when trees are stressed, they're much more vulnerable to things like pests and diseases, and will obviously be less tolerant to climate change and the effects that that brings. So trying to improve the health and condition of existing trees, making sure they're in a space where they've got everything they need, they've got access to water, they've got space for their roots as best as you can, which is a real challenge in urban areas where, you know, there's not a lot of space, you've got lots of hard surfaces, but trying to, wherever possible, improve the health and condition of those existing trees is a really key way that we can help. This is a term that lots of you might be familiar with, but I thought it was a really important one to include. So planting the right tree in the right place for the right reasons. So thinking about which species to plant to best suit the purpose, and making sure that it's suitable for the locations. Not planting an absolutely, you know, massive tree like ash or oak or lime. Not that you'd be planting ash at the moment, but trees of that sort of size in a space that really is only suited to a small tree, and vice versa. You don't want to be planting a small tree like a cherry in a space that could happily support, you know, a large stature tree that will be able to provide a much greater amount of benefit. And the final one I thought would be nice to include is also highlighting the sort of care for newly establishing trees. So rather than focusing on how many trees are planted, focusing a bit more on planting them well, making sure that they've got everything they need, making sure they've got a long-term monitoring and maintenance program like watering in place. So as I say, those are not exhaustive. That's just 5 I could think of that would be helpful to include. That is kind of everything that I planned to talk about today. So I just wanted to say a big thank you for everyone for joining today. If you wanted to sort of find out a little bit more about some of the projects that we've been working on, or if you would like to access, I'll obviously send the links through at the end of the webinar, but if you wanted to access any of the resources or references or anything like that I talked about today, you can pop onto our website, follow us on LinkedIn, or feel free to pop me an email as well. And there's a QR code up there if that's easier for you to scan it. Cool. So I think we've got actually finished a bit quicker than I was planning. It always goes faster when you're on a webinar, but yeah, we've got time for some questions before the end. So I'll hand back to Sarah, who's going to host it.
Hello, thank you so much, Danni. That's really interesting. And it's good to hear all the things we can do to help our treescapes. Brilliant, thank you. So I have got not that many questions, so please do pop your questions in now. So I do have one question regarding the tree canopy cover. Just asking about how much protect, or how much, in fact, I'll just read the question. How do street trees have any canopy value when they are pollarded every 3 years? Do you have an answer for that one?
I mean, I was going to say sort of tree maintenance and tree care is definitely not my area of expertise,
Yeah.
but you know, it's really important to care for trees and make sure that they are suited to the space that they are within. So pollarding helps to ensure that they can thrive and live successfully where they're placed.
So it manages their size, doesn't it, pollarding?
Yeah.
It's a really old traditional way of maintaining tree health, actually. So even though it looks quite brutal,
Yeah.
when it gets done, I think it has been proven to actually benefit the tree and still provide that canopy cover. It will still do all the transpiration and all that sort of
It's quite amazing to see that after they've been pollarded. I think at first they look quite extreme, but at this time of year, I've got a street of limes that are pollarded really regularly. And when it happens, you think, oh my gosh, it's gone, it's completely gone. And then the next spring, it's actually beautiful seeing leaves coming out. It's amazing and it feels really lovely. So yeah.
It does actually create more leaf, I think, as well. Actually creates more leaf cover, ironically, even though it looks devastating. But yeah. So we've also got a question which I could probably help you answer. If 10% of ash trees will not die, how are you planning to care for them and contribute to the research into resistance to ash dieback? So that's kind of like a big question, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of people involved in that aspect.
Definitely. And trying to understand what makes that 10%, it's not special, but I've forgotten the word, but why are that 10% surviving? Is it where they're planted? Is it their age? Are they a variety of ash species that's got a slightly better tolerance? The sort of provenance, so where that tree seed originated from, is that area more tolerant? And yeah, there's a number of researchers and experts that are really trying to understand that, because that's that sort of, I suppose that's the little nugget of information that will help us to develop or plans for how we can repopulate the landscape in the long term. It's definitely not something that we are ready for now, but I think it's a hope that we will be able to find some resistant varieties or species that can replace ash but still provide those amazing benefits.
Yeah, I think they're locating those trees, aren't they? And then taking some of the trees that are found to be resilient, taking the seed, growing them. But obviously it's a really long process because they take a long time to grow. But there is a lot of work going on, as you say, to protect those trees and to kind of use the information going forward to hopefully save our ash trees, because it would be very sad if we lost all of them. So let's just have a quick look. Oh, yes, it's actually an interesting comment about how tree planting in city centres is often badly designed, and the trees suffer from compacted roots, and obviously they won't have their mycorrhizal networks quite so intact because of the actual landscape is probably not optimal for trees. So how do we address those problems?
I think it's making sure that when trees are planted that it's been planned well. So the right tree has been selected for the place that they're going to go. As I said earlier, some spaces will have ample space to support a really large tree once it's reached maturity, and others will be better suited to a smaller tree. And I think having that planning in place and knowing that when you're planting a tree, it's the right tree for that spot. Also making sure that planting techniques are really good, so making sure that people are following the best practice to make sure they're going in the ground really well, they're supported if they need it, and also the infrastructure is there. So there are organisations which provide, you know, engineered solutions like Green Blue Urban for planting trees in urban spaces. But there are still lots of green spaces within urban areas. There are obviously examples of trees that are not planted well and that do have compacted soils and are squished into a little tiny space that really isn't suited. But I think a lot of people are realising actually that although we need to plant more trees, we also need to make sure that when we are planting them, we're planting them well, because otherwise it's kind of a waste of people's time if they're putting a tree in and it's not got the right environment, it's not been planted very well, and it's not actually able to reach maturity. That's a lot of effort that's gone into planting that tree that hasn't realised the benefit, I suppose. So yeah, just making sure that those plans are in place and that the people delivering it have really thought about all those things.
Yeah.
Of course, making sure that afterwards you've got the maintenance and aftercare, because you know, it's all great planting trees, but they're going to need watering, particularly in the summer. Over the next sort of, you know, period of time to get them actually to the point where they're able to produce some of those benefits. So yeah,
I think there is increasing amounts of research, isn't there, and design ideas to because it is a problem, and I think people recognise that in councils and people that plant grow trees, people that, you know, architects and everything, town planners. So there are some new methods. There's a Stockholm system which is at the moment looking like quite a good way of planting street trees, but obviously trees have a really long lifespan. So in order to really determine how effective that is, we're looking at quite a few years, but it is brilliant that there is a lot of work going on. So it is only going to get better, I think, as you were saying.
and really, I mean, we need trees everywhere, but importantly where people live, because that's where you're going to realise the benefits. The further you are away from them, the less you're going to be impacted by those benefits. So I think, and that's one of the things that the tree equity tool is really focused on, is planting trees where it's most needed. Where are people and where are those gaps in canopy cover that we need to think about closing? So yeah.
And there is a bit of a question here as well, just talking about, should greater numbers of exotics from warmer climates be planted in the face of climate change? If there are species or cultivars from the same genus as natives, there may be some crossover, so they can perform similar habitat functions in the ecology. So that is something that is happening, isn't it, all the time? Research about what works, what doesn't. Obviously, the climate is changing all the time, because quite a few years, 10 years ago, it was boiling hot, wasn't it? We were talking about planting things that can cope with drought, and now we're having a lot of flooding. So it is not particularly easy, but that is happening, isn't it, I think?
And I think the key point with that is actually, I think a lot of I suppose one of the greatest things that we can have that's going to have the greatest impact is diversity of species. So I think making sure that, you know, populations aren't dominated by a small number of key species that represent, you know, like a large proportion of the population. It gives much greater protection and resilience throughout the population, you know, in the event of something like ash dieback coming again. You know, if you've got a more diverse population with lots of diversity of species, you've got smaller proportions of each one represented. It means that when something like ash dieback comes along, you're talking about a much smaller proportion of the population. And I'm not saying that we need to reduce the ones we've got. I'm saying that when we plant new trees, when we think about planning for new tree establishment, we need to make sure that we're looking at what we already have and then further diversifying that population. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's going to have it, you know, inevitably has to include a variety of species from different climates, different temperatures. And I think one of the things that seems to be really at the forefront of a lot of research at the moment is around seed provenance. So not just about which species, but where that seed has originated from, because the environment they sort of, I suppose, start their lives in will give them a certain tolerance to different environments.
Yeah, and that's something that we're doing with the Saving Devon Treescapes project, because we do have 2 nurseries, one which grows cell-grown plants and one quite new one which is going to be bare root trees. but we do collect seeds locally from within Devon, and we record where they're from, and then we try, if we can, to actually plant the trees from an area back into that area. So the seed from the trees back into that area. So yeah, and we do also try to grow as many different varieties as we can to increase that biodiversity, as you're saying, because that will protect, hopefully, the treescapes. Because ash tree is the second most dominant species in our countryside, which is why it's going to have such a devastating effect, and about 1,000 species rely entirely on the ash tree. So obviously, if we have more, there's more of a chance of those species maybe being able to migrate to other trees that might be similar or have a partnership. So yeah, definitely biodiversity is key. Brilliant. Okay. And then there is just the final question, I think. Is there a role for forest gardening in urban spaces? I think we're talking about agroforestry there.
It's an interesting question. I've never been asked that one before.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's lots of benefits from agroforestry or that kind of practice. I suppose that feels more sort of suited to the countryside, but I'd definitely be interested to look into that. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that one, but I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on it.
That's very interesting. I think there is a growing interest in agroforestry. Certainly, smaller landholders and farmers are looking into it, I think. In urban spaces, I don't know. I think it, again, like you say, it's maybe that's like a discussion on that, couldn't we?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the availability of land really in urban areas. It's so limited, and some urban areas have got, still space to plant, but the majority of councils that we work with are already so limited by the space that's already there, and there's so much competition for it for other things like housing and infrastructure that it is really difficult sometimes to identify spaces for new trees or replacing trees. So yeah, I think that would definitely come down to what space is actually available within the urban area. Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you so much, Danny. That's fantastic. We've had lots of great questions, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. Just to let you know that we will be following up with some information and links, any links that we've talked about. I'll be sending some feedback forms out. If you could fill those out, that would be amazing. Yeah, so if you have any questions about any events or anything you'd like to get involved with, please do email me afterwards. There's lots of things going on. There's a few tree talks, tree ID walks, poetry workshops based around ash dieback. So there's lots going on over the next few months. So do check out our website at Devon Wildlife Trust. But if you do have any questions at any point, please do email me.